on. But before I go into that, if I go back to sort of where we were at in 2018 and how we sort of used analysis and what our program looked like, it was very much looking at using Game Breaker quite a lot, and it was a lot of emphasis on team meetings. So we'd get the games, and I tried to find the most complicated code window I could to sort of highlight some of the stuff that we do within it. And this is what I came up with. So this is sort of stuff where I'd code it myself, or I'd have someone code it for me if I was lucky enough to get one of the graddies to help me out with that. And then we'd have a team meeting and we'd go through it all. And I was finding that it was quite hard to get everyone together. We're quite a busy school at Oakham with lots going on. We're boarding day, loads of stuff going on with extracurricular activities as well. It's quite challenging to use everything that we've got and see our players. So I was kind of looking for some form of platform to share everything. So we used to use something called Oakham TV, which is kind of like a YouTube, but in-house. And I was finding it was okay, but it wasn't great at being able to share lots more of the analysis, that they didn't really understand it. They didn't really work it out. And that was a bit of a challenge. So I met Mark in a coffee shop. This is the coffee shop in Oakham, in Costa, where he sort of spoke to me with my director of sports about the platform Coach Logic. And he gave me his big long sales pitch, as I'm sure he has done with a lot of you guys, with what it offers. And if I'm honest, what I really wanted the platform for was just sharing what I was doing on Game Breaker. So I'd still use it quite a lot, and I'd just put everything up onto there, and it integrates quite nicely with being able to do that. And that's kind of where I was at. But as I've sort of talked through now, it's changed quite a lot with being busy with what's going on, that just wasn't sustainable to do this amount of coding, this amount of stuff to be able to produce it regularly. So we've moved into a slightly different way of doing that now, to have a little bit of time to sort it out. And we split them into sort of these big rocks. And the big rocks were the main things that we wanted them to focus on and look at. So you've got the main bits of with the ball would be an outlet and high line and high transfer. And to non-hockey people, that's when you're starting from your own back line or when you're starting from further up on the field. And then pressing and deep defense is the opposite of that. So it's when the opposition have the ball and how we win it back. And then deep defense is when we're sort of defending our own goal area. And then you have the special team stuff. So penalty corner attack and penalty corner defense sort of came under the same things. And then we looked at how we split the responsibility. So you have staff leads across the top, and that would be between myself and my assistant coach, Jamie. And that was essentially, if they needed an definitive answer or they weren't sure on something, they would go to this person that would be able to help them out. But then the main bit was on the pupil leads in terms of who was responsible for clipping the game and what was happening. So all of these are split between an upper sixth and a lower sixth. So the lower sixth gets the opportunity to learn it, and the upper sixth is sort of the leader and has that hierarchy that tends to happen. And then underneath that, you had the pupil support. So these were the guys generally in those sort of playing lines that would be around it, and it would influence them the most. And between all of these guys, they're responsible for clipping the game and coding the game. So you'll see on the bottom, it sort of explains that they're responsible for clipping it within 48 hours of the fixture being published. So we can have it nice and quick while it's quite fresh. But we recognize that the reason I put them into pupil leads and pupil support is that the pupil leads are ultimately responsible for it happening, but they don't have to do all of the work that we use. We did a team analysis straight back after the game. So we introduced these big rocks of what they were looking at. And then I just let them go loose and go and have a go with it, go and code some stuff, go and clip some stuff. And I taught them how to do it on the big screen and just said, look, have fun, go and code anything. I'm not particularly bothered about what you do. Just tag it. So they had a little go. After they had they had to tag 10 minutes. So I split it up and they just had to tag those general bits in the groups they're in. And then I gave them a little bit of time to present back what they'd spotted in their group. So you see on the picture on the right, that's the lads presenting some stuff back from what they saw. And then they just sort of spoke about it, and they had the whiteboard there and talk through a few bits. And then I would jump in and just help them out to scaffold it because they were still learning quite a lot on it. And if I'm honest, that what they spotted wasn't great, but it was their first go, so that was fine. And it was more about the process, and that's where it being in the development terms really important, because there's no worry about winning or getting a result in the next game. It's purely about how can we be better in what we're doing. and that was quite useful in terms of what he saw. But then I just gave him a little bit of help in terms of, okay, can you clip some better examples? Because this is okay, but I think you've got some better stuff. Because they all fall into the trap of what I'm sure most coaches have done, of a bit of death by video. So they'll have about 100 clips illustrating the same point. So it was sort of teaching them those skills of what are you actually looking for and being a little bit more specific with it. But then it's developing their analysis skills a little bit further, because I spotted that, similar to Ben, that they were really struggling with what were they actually looking for when they're coding a game, and they were just watching the game and clipping what I'd asked them to clip, but they didn't really know what they were looking at. So I started to ask them a few questions. So what are you looking at? What are you seeing? And just giving them a little bit of structure. So then when we had another video meeting, they had to present back and basically answer these questions. So if they didn't really have a clue what they were looking for, it gave them a little bit of structure. And then again, we had that same meeting room where we went into it and spoke a little bit more about what it was within that, so they could understand. But then we started to make some real progress. So you'll see in here of is finding a good clip and then asking them what they're seeing. So starting to develop a bit of a coach's eye of what are you spotting, what are you seeing. So giving a little bit of structure in it. So we were playing a little bit of zone stuff and exploring that and understanding it and getting them to sort of talk about it and answer it. And if you can see from the timestamp, they're pretty quick in terms that they get it on their phones, which is really useful. So something that I learned quite quickly is that they never do it on a computer unless I facilitate them doing it on a computer. It's always done on their phones, and that's fine. But it means that it's actually quicker to get in contact with them on Coach Logic than any other way, because they've got it on what they had to sort of really go at. And it was quite interesting to note a real change in their mindset with this. Of if you look at Tees on here and how we could create space in the midfield pocket, Tees didn't play this game because he had a detention, so he couldn't play. But he didn't sort of think, well, I've got a code. Why I wasn't at the game, so I didn't have to do that. And that was really powerful, sort of in a mindset change for him, of that you weren't there because of academic reasons, but you let your teammates down if you don't understand what we covered, because it was really important for us to understand that, to develop our understanding of the tactics as a whole. So he had to catch up because he'd missed it because he hadn't done his work. So it was his responsibility to catch. And the boys, how we sort of structure it is that at the national indoor finals, there's only one court. So there's lots of downtime. So you play across two groups and you'll have lots of time where you're just sitting around, hanging about. So I started a little while ago of asking the boys to analyze the teams we're going to play, because you're going to see them anyway. So why not? And it was really cool seeing them collecting some video themselves, uploading it onto the platform, and then talking through the game plan. And this is them leading it. So you see me just sat in there listening in on what they were saying. And then a couple of bits where I checked and challenged of what they were saying and what they were doing. But ultimately, the lads came up with the game plan for one of our biggest indoor games of the season. Of yes, we record some bits of training. So you see in here, we're recording us nailing our penalty corner defence of what good looks like. And then we put up and called them Cachia Masterclasses of this is what good looks like. And then we went back and coded it all so that you always had a reference point of if we were going to look at something, so a particular penalty corner defence routine, it was already tagged. So you could just click on that and say, this is what good looks like. So if we came back to it and didn't use it for a few weeks, but we were playing a team where that was quite important, you could just say, we're going to run this. And then they could go, right, I'm just going to check on my phone and see what it was. So it was quite normal in the changing rooms for lads to be out on their phones and just checking information to make sure that they were quite happy with it. Really important. But then I started to find that this was really cool, of that the players started to take ownership of what was going on. So Ollie, unfortunately, broke his hand in the warm-up for this game, ironically. And he couldn't play, but then he started to give feedback to the other guys who were filling in for him of this is my experience of how I can help you out. Of we were struggling to outlet because we didn't have the confidence. And this was him sort of chatting it through. And it was really nice to have the players giving peer feedback rather than me giving any feedback. It was just, this is what we're seeing. So I sort of spoke about it and sort of how we do it in training and what it looks like in a game. And then he just topped it up, which was really nice to see. But sort of moving on to...
Sorry, James, just on that. We ran a competition, I think, last year. It was to find out who the most engaged player was on the platform. And we had this top 10. Top of it was a guy called Jamie Dobby, who we then found out had been injured the whole season, and so he wasn't actually playing at all. And he was at Merchiston High School. The reason that I can mention his name is because he's since left school and got signed up straight into the Glasgow Warriors pro team. So there was a guy who missed a whole season of rugby, but managed to keep developing his rugby IQ and be part of the squad, so that he could really smash his last year, and enough to get a pro contract at the end of it. So that story isn't unique. It happens a lot, and I really enjoy that part of it, because sports is difficult.
I think it was really big for Ollie as well, because Ollie was the captain, and he found it quite difficult that he couldn't play. And this allowed him to really be part of the group. He'd still come to training, he'd still be there at game day, but this was him having a real impact on the team. I think that really helped him through being quite frustrated that he couldn't play as we got to some quite big games. Their special button, and then players starting to clip stuff for themselves. And that was quite cool seeing that. They realised that they could have it for individual feedback, in Chris's case, or they could use it for their A-level footage, which they started to clock right at the end of the year when they're all scrambling around having not done anything, to how they could collect that footage. And the hockey players were miles ahead of the other sports because it was all there and they could just clip it, do it and sort it and download it. And that was really useful for them. Couldn't think of another way of getting it into the presentation. So Chris is a good example that I sort of spoke about, of that he's in the pathway and he gets feedback through that, and sort of plays his club hockey as well and gets feedback through that. And he kept asking me could we have a meeting and could I talk through some development areas for him? And he'd ask quite a lot for it. And I was finding it really hard to relate to him, because we'd sit down and he'd come to the office and we'd have a chat, but he was explaining things and I was saying, in this situation, it's this, and loads of things were really context specific and it was really difficult. So what I asked him to do was, can you just go and tag every time you got on the ball in the whole game, and then just send me what you think about, of what are your thoughts? And it was so useful in terms of that he could ping me stuff and say, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm thinking, what do you think? And then we could have a bit of dialogue and we could talk about it. And we could chat about what we were doing and where we were going from it. And then we'd follow that up with stuff on the pitch and sort of brought it to life a little bit more. So it was a real lifesaver when I was struggling with being able to have these conversations of, he wanted meetings all the time. And I was going, I haven't really got anything else to say. It's sort of, can we do this and can we do that? And it really helped with that for the individual feedback. And that was really